We are live, Marty. No errors.
No errors.
Everything
There's always an
just,
error.
I know. It says we're streaming on all the platforms. No viewers yet. Classic
Come on, viewers.
start to a live stream.
Where's
See who
Doreen when we
shows
need
up
her?
first. I know. She's got a, there she is. It says 0 viewers on Facebook, and yet she's commenting. That's how good Doreen is.
Yeah, she beats the tech.
I get to see Doreen in a couple weeks.
Yeah, Florida.
We're gonna be in Orlando. Marty will be very busy at our all-staff conference, meeting with the executive team, then meeting with the staff, then dealing with, enjoying the company of our board of directors. But I am a man of the people, Marty, and so I am running all over Florida and meeting as many people as possible.
I noticed that you had a very busy schedule.
Yeah. I'm gonna meet a few people for lunch in Sarasota on Tuesday, January 20th, and then I'm gonna get back to Orlando that evening for another meeting. And then we have the actual conference. So I'm there for that. That part's blocked off. But then after the conference on Sunday, January 25th, I'm gonna go down to Port St. Lucie area in the afternoon. And then I'm going to go down to West Palm Beach that evening. And then I'm going to be down in Miami Coral Gables on Monday. And then I'm gone. But if you're in any of those areas, by all means, please get in touch. Come meet me. I would love to meet you. Take pictures, give away stickers, share stories, whatever.
Bam. Well, speaking of busy schedules, I'm never going to get through the document. The holiday backlog is real. So we're going to do our best, but we had some announcements before we get too far into this. There's all kinds of reasons we're busy tonight. But first
we got Corey in the chat from YouTube saying he's going to see you in Hamilton, Ontario next month.
Heck
so
yeah,
you're going places too. You're meeting people.
Yeah. I go plenty of places. Yeah, don't tell my wife I'm not going places. She'll correct you fast. 2026 going to be a whirlwind. And I'll tell you why. What a segue. Book number 2 launches in April 2nd. The Gospel of Being Human, authored by Marty Solomon and Reed Dent. It's going to hit bookshelves near you. That means book tour is upon us. But before book tour, we need to have a book launch group, a book launch team. And it's a fun experience. People they get the book a little early, chapter by chapter. They get to read it. They get to engage with it. And the idea is that they get to kind of spread the word, because we are looking for people to get excited. We're looking for pre-orders. That's the name of the business. You know me, I'm all about the business.
Oh, yeah, business guy.
So anyway, that's what we're trying to do. So we're looking, last time we had a launch team of about 100 people and had a ton of fun. We drop everybody into a Facebook group and we talk about things and we share things. We have a couple Zoom calls. It's a fun exclusive experience. But if anybody, and it's kind of designed for folks that have social media that are going to be willing to read the book, share some of their favorite quotes, talk about the book, invite people to pre-order the book, use their social media to spread the word. That's the design. So if that is something that you're like, man, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'll share some quotes. I want to read the book.
If you're watching this live stream, you probably qualify.
You're probably qualified. Brent, I think, can grab a link for the application. We have an application that's going to be open until not this Monday, but the Monday after.
Yeah, you know what so that went out in the Baymont Messenger this morning. Some people got that email and have it there, but I linked the books page on your website so that people could pre-order, but then you started talking about the book launch team. And so I think I'm just going to take all that stuff and put that on your website as well. So if you just go to martysolomon.com and go to the books page, that'll all be there. Give me about 10 minutes.
It works for me.
We'll get Marty busy with some questions.
Yeah, Brent will be working behind the scenes. I like that. Okay, so yeah, that's some of those announcements. Next announcement is we needed to move next month's live stream, which was originally slated for Sunday, February 15th. It was going to be a GMT edition live stream. But that's actually when Josh Bossay's memorial service is going to be. And we also sent out we will be sending out in the messenger and elsewhere a link for where you can watch that service online. That will be incoming, but we'll need to move our live stream away from where it was scheduled. So we picked a new date. I don't know if Brian David is already with us, but that was supposed to be Kaya's a month. So
he's in the chat. He's in the chat. Okay. He might tell us right now.
Brian David, I'm going to call you on Friday. I'm also going to call the other Brian who's in the chat right now. I'm going to talk to so many Brians on Friday. I don't know if you're going to be able to pick up the phone, Brian David, but I'm going to call you on Friday to talk about some things. One of them being, are you free on Wednesday, February 11th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time? Because if he is, we are going to do live stream Chiasm edition over here.
He says, quote, you know it, let's roll.
Bam.
For you, anything, he says.
All right, I'm still going to call you on Friday. We're going to chit-chat. But there you go. So that's our next live stream is Wednesday, February 11th, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Sounds like it's going to be Chiasm edition. We got a little bit more questions than we did the last time, Brian, so buckle up. Oh, let's see here. I'm ready to dive into some questions. I've taken up enough time. We got launch team. We got next month's live stream. We got so much to talk about. You ready, Brent, to go work on my website while I
am, yes.
People? All right, wonderful.
I'm itching. I can't wait.
All right, here we go. First question from Kyle. Kyle says, first of all, I want to thank you for everything you've done with Bema. You are welcome, Kyle. Tell us a little bit about his story. How he made it through the first 5 seasons. He's bouncing around season 6 right now. He's getting ready to leave his position. He has a church position. I'll leave the details out of that, but he's getting ready to kind of leave that. It's got him thinking about, could church be done differently, more in line with what Jesus intended it to be? What could the church be if it were free to be the church instead of what people expect it to be? This leads me to where I'm at. I thought about planting a church, if you want to call it that. Start from scratch. Excuse me. My question essentially is, how would you do church in America if you could start one from scratch? If you could start something fresh with no prior tradition? And what would you want it to look like? Would love to hear your thoughts or thoughts from the Bema team. It's a great question, Kyle. I used to be really, really passionate about this little thought experiment. If nothing else, a thought experiment, a dream. A younger version of me really thought that there was a lot of answers to a lot of questions, and that's great. An older version of me doesn't think that anymore. And that's not to say, Kyle, you should stop thinking about this and not plant a church. There's a million great reasons to plant a church and a million ways to do it, and all of them are beautiful. And if I did plant a church, I would lean into the things that meant a lot to me. I would gather around the text. I've thought about putting music in different spaces, because for me, I always kind of hated how everything was about this consumer experience, and I wanted to gather for the discipline of gathering, like the communal practice of gathering as the people of God around the Word of God. And those are some of my thoughts. But I will also tell you, Kyle, as I've gotten older, I don't trust myself to create something that's not immensely more broken than anything else we're doing. B, there's such rich beauty in any of these other traditions held rightly. The trick isn't that we've strayed or that all of our vehicles are not helpful. It's that we could hold any of these things in ways that are beautiful and helpful. It's who we are. It's not what we're doing. And that man, I hate that, Kyle, because I love your question, and I'm not trying to poo-poo on your idea here. I'm not trying to say, no, don't think about this. Don't start. It's just where I've been. You asked honestly, would love to get my thoughts. My thoughts, I used to dream about what my church would be when I started one. And now I'm like, man, there are so many beautiful traditions. Now I actually have a hard time thinking, if I could start from scratch, which tradition would I choose? Because the last thing I would do now today is plant a church. I would have to be like, would I be this or would I be this? Would I go here or would I go there? Because there's so many beautiful things I've found in all these traditions. I would love to just go sit in and marinate in spiritually and let it shape me and let the people in those traditions shape me. Do with that what you will. I've been there though. A younger version of me absolutely wrestled with a lot of that stuff, and I had some dreams, but they're just not as sexy as they used to be for me. So there you go. Joshua says, hello. First of all, I can't express how much your podcast has helped me. Well, you're welcome. Everybody needs to stop starting their questions that way. It's just so nice. Was hoping to get some advice about an accessible Bible study book. I'm in a group that doesn't seem to be interested in following the podcast. Yet I'm still trying to talk to them. I think they have gotten stuck in a trend of going through what I would consider Christian self-help books and through a random verse here and there, but not really growing in biblical knowledge. The people in the group may be intimidated by true Bible study. Are there any books that you can recommend that are accessible and easy to follow, but are also focused on increasing knowledge about the Bible? It's a great question, Joshua. Obviously, I'm going to jokingly and selfishly say, have you heard about the book Asking Better Questions of the Bible by Marty Solomon? Because it's designed to be maybe a little bit more accessible than the podcast, and it might fit in that window. But let's say you need to get away from Marty and away from Bema. I have always loved. I still to this day recommend people start with Lois Tverberg's books. They're so beautifully accessible. They're easy to read. They're not heavy-handed. They don't come off like some abrasive top rope. They're not fringy and pushing the envelope. They're just good, solid, contextual, hermeneutical goodness. And so, sitting at the feet of Rabbi Jesus, walking in the dust of Rabbi Jesus, reading the Bible with Rabbi Jesus. Those are always places that I recommend people starting. And then there's always a chance, Joshua, that this group is really just not, that's just not where they're at. It's just not what they're looking for. And it's not what they need, at least what they think they need. And that's a part of where we're at. We can't make people need something or even make people want what they need or any of those things. So maybe it's just not where they're at, and it's just not their jam. That's okay. That's really honestly okay. It's sometimes frustrating and hard because you want to find other people around you that can help you dive into this in community. But in this case, maybe you can find a good fit with some resources like that, but maybe those resources aren't where they're at. And that's sometimes a part of it. Tim says, Matthew 12, 43 through 45. I get that the unclean spirit leaves and comes back with more unclean spirits to an empty house. But as Marty says, what stands out as odd? The unclean spirit travels through dry places, Tim emphasizes, seeking rest, and it doesn't find any. I find so many references to the sea, the abyss, starting in Genesis 1, and beasts rising out of the sea through Daniel and Revelation, and the legion goes out of the pigs and wants to go into the sea and the abyss. Could this be tied to mikveh and baptism? I don't know about that, but I love where you're headed with this, Tim. Revelation 21 culminates with a new heaven and a new earth. It's pointing out that there's no more sea. Okay, yes. I've never heard anyone speak to this. Maybe I'm all wet. I see what you did there, Tim. Maybe you're all wet. I like it. But I would love some feedback if you would. Yeah, I love where your head is at. And I love that you are thinking text, because that's what you do. You think about what's odd and what stands out. And then you ask the question, what stands out about the text? And those are, there's some great ideas that you throw out there. One of my thoughts is that dry places typically usually refers to the wilderness, and the wilderness is a place of testing and of trial. And so it's where you would expect to encounter. Think of Jesus in the wilderness, Jesus for 40 days in the wilderness, being tempted by the devil, being tempted by Satan, being tempted by the demonic kingdom. And that's often where you might find spirits, unclean spirits in that place. So I've always just kind of read that as, well, it leaves and it goes to the place that unclean spirits go to, the wilderness, the place of temptation. and then, it doesn't find a place to rest, so it comes back. And I've always kind of read it without even thinking about it, Tim. I've always read that as, where temptation really finds a home. See what I did? It finds a home not in wilderness, but when you're in comfort, when you're settled in the promised land. So it tries to tempt people out in the wilderness, but where it really finds a home, and it brings back 7 friends. Now, I'm just abstractly reading into that. And I love your question, because I'd never really stopped long enough to think in that way. I don't have a good, quick answer that comes to my mind, but it's the beauty of what we're doing with Bema, and you're getting it. You've got it, Tim. Like, you're thinking the right way, you're asking the right questions. And when you sit down with a Bible study that Joshua is trying to build, but when you have other people that jump into this, you come up with some really cool insights. And so who knows what I'm not thinking about or what I'm not seeing. I love your question. Jacqueline says, we have a group that is listening and discussing your podcast currently. We are up to episode 18. We have one member who has a significant issue with each session not including how it's pointing to Christ, and using references from Messianic prophecy, and to rely on interpretations by those who are, it seems, contrary to our Christian faith, or at the very least incomplete, without showing how it relates in light of Jesus, the resurrection and salvation. Presumably the podcast is directed at Christian believers. Could you please comment? Yeah. Let me start here, Jacqueline. My first comment will be, this could be good news or bad news. I'm not sure which one it will be. It's going to get worse. We're going to talk about it more directly. If you're in episode 18, we're just starting to, you're right on track. This person in your group, they're picking it up, and it's kind of irritating them and bothering them, because we're dripping the idea that you're talking about. And then as we get further and further into session 2, we're going to start talking more directly about it. Now, that could be good, because we're going to address it directly and head on and try to speak about it. It could also be bad, because it's just going to make that, if this person in your group or you doesn't love that, it's going to continue to kind of be a more abrasive. It's going to become a more abrasive irritation. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes there's one single idea that you can just this is one thing I hate about Marty and the Bema podcast, but I find a lot of goodness, and I just keep on listening. For some people, we're not in the same place. We're not quite having the same conversation, and I just need to, and that's totally understandable. The Bema podcast is not the only hermeneutic. It's not the only place where people find life-giving truth and teaching. But here's my second comment. It is very intentional on our part, and it's very intentional on my part. One of the things I'm trying to do is I'm trying to break us of the very thing that this person in your group is wanting. What Christians have done with that reading of the Bible, and this person in your group probably doesn't even know this, and they don't intentionally engage this, but the ways that Christians have read the Bible in that way leads to what we might call supersessionism, which is, it's a lot of things. But in this case, a relevant discussion point might be, all of that story was just about Jesus. Well, A, I'm not sure that that's actually how I understand or read the scripture. But B, what does that mean about all those people that lived from Genesis to Matthew? Everything that they experienced with God, the covenant that he made with them, the things that he did with Israel, the way that he delivered them and called them into what they understood as, we might use words like salvation or freedom in God and following God and the kingdom of God in their world. All of that was just kind of you want to read the story for the full story that it is, so that later, then when you get to Jesus, if the story only has value because later we get to Jesus, then the story doesn't have value before Jesus. And we want to read the Bible with a sense of, what did this inspired book mean to its Hebrew audiences before Jesus showed up? When Jesus shows up, it will be glorious because it will be the fulfillment. It will be the incarnation. It will be the embodiment of everything that we were trying to live out in the story prior to Jesus. Now the incarnation shows up. But you're in episode 18. It's way early to be unpacking this stuff. And so along the journey, we just try to keep going there. But this person, and maybe even yourself, Jacqueline, I feel like maybe in your question, you're even kind of like, I don't really know. I don't know where I land on this, which is totally understandable and fine. But part of the struggle is we keep trying to make Bema fit with all of this assumed theology that we know is right. And Bema is kind of like the supplementary context we're going to bring along. And the podcast is kind of designed to be like, like eventually you can't force every single square peg into every round hole. It's just not going to go together quite well. And you're not going to have to get rid of everything, but you are going to have to start to go, wait a minute, is there? And so we are trying to push at, are there better ways to read this? And that may not work for everybody. That's okay. It's okay. I've now said that 3 times tonight. It is okay. Devin says this. Same thing. I want you guys to know I really appreciate and enjoy your podcast. You guys always start that way. Thank you. Thank you, Devin. We're glad that people enjoy it. It's helped him wrestle, or her. I don't know, Devin. I don't know which pronouns I should be using here. Help me wrestle with the text as well as others who are interested in joining. I have run into one thing I can't really wrap my head around. When we hit Romans season 4, episode 151, we say that Abraham was credited with righteousness by his faith. And we say we can achieve it by the same faith, by trusting the story. But if this is the case, why did Jesus have to die? If we could put our faith in God's love from the get-go, then why? To bring shalom, to bring justice of getting things back together in our world. But no matter what, our righteousness rests in faith in God's love and how he sees us. You can see my mind has been reeling on this for a while, and I appreciate your guidance. Yeah, I love the question, Devin. It's a good question. And the question comes because we have really been ingrained with a pretty singular understanding of atonement theology and atonement theory and how atonement works. Much of evangelicalism understands atonement through one single lens: substitution. There is a legal requirement, there's a legal demand, and that explains why Jesus had to die. And I am not here to tell you that that is wrong. I'm here to tell you that it is a piece of a much, much larger conversation, which opens up the idea of atonement and lets it breathe a little bit. And we can really start to, and we're going to get into that. If you're in Romans and you've been listening in order, Devin, then keep listening, because it's not too far later in season 4 that we're going to talk about Hebrews. We're going to spend 2 episodes on Hebrews, and one of them is about atonement. And we're going to talk about all these different atonement theories. And it's not which one is right. It's the fact that atonement has a lot of different aspects to it. And the question of why Jesus had to die is a very, very central, important, but a question that has many different ways that Christian history, Orthodox Christian history, has answered that question. In the modern fundamentalist evangelical world, we have really focused and refined one of the ways to talk about that. And when you over-focus, when you hyper-focus and overdo one explanation and start to build way more on that one piece than we should be building, because we should be building on all these other pieces, building an understanding of atonement. But when we only focus on one, hyper-focus on it, and build off of that one piece, you get this stunted understanding of how atonement functions. And I'm not going to be able to sit here in 5 minutes on a live stream Q&A with a lot of folks that are on episode 18 and quickly explain, well, here's all the other ways that atonement works. I mean, you have New Testament scholars that give their whole careers and lives to talking about these concepts and these schools of theology. And so it's going to be beautiful. Just keep on listening. Keep on hanging in there. Is it that Jesus had to die because without that death, I can't go to heaven? Or is it that Jesus had to die because, as Hebrews says 7, 8 times, without Jesus's death, there's no cleansing of my conscience? Does Jesus die? Here's another one of my favorite phrases. Jesus didn't go to the cross so that you didn't have to. Jesus went to the cross to show you how to. Right? So his death is also an example of what self-sacrificial love can look like, an example of Philippians 2. Jesus becomes obedient to death, even death on a cross, because he's willing to humble himself. Like there's a picture and an image of what that looks like. So there's a lot there. And I would just, there's some cool stuff. The book that I would recommend reading, the book that we'll recommend in season 4, is a book by Scott McKnight, pretty safe scholar to read, pretty moderate, middle of the road, smart dude. And he wrote a book called A Community Called Atonement. A Community Called Atonement. And in that book, he essentially says there's all these different atonement theories, and they're all useful. It's like golf clubs in a golf bag. You need to know which club that you need to use in any given situation. You don't hit your putter off of the tee box, and you don't use your 7-iron on the green. So every atonement theory is good for something and very helpful, but you need to know which atonement theory you're using in what situation and why you would use it that way. And what we've done is we've just taken the pitching wedge of penal substitutionary atonement and just grilled people theologically with it. So anyway, there you go. I have, Brent, those next questions I'm going to come back to if I have time. There's a little subgroup of questions here from Kevin and Christy, and if I get time, I'm going to come back to them. I don't have high hopes, but we're going to see. So far, we're making good time. Here's Lucas. Lucas has got a question.
Just got to celebrate when you're making good time.
Wow.
I didn't know what that applause was going to sound like. I just found an extra set of sound effects when I was getting ready for an upcoming section that requires a sound effect.
Wow. No warning or nothing. I'm finding my spirit, which left my body there for a moment.
Perfect.
All right, I'm going to Lucas's question here. That was well done. I like it. I love when Brent finds ways to surprise me. Lucas has a question here, and I'm going to share my screen for this. Lucas says, I have a question that keeps bugging me, and I didn't see y'all address it on the podcast. Yeah, and there's a good reason why, Lucas. This wasn't a rabbit trail I wanted to dive down, but you asked the question, so we're going to do it. Titus 1:14. It seems to me pretty clear, this command, and I would have assumed that Paul is talking about the Midrash here. How do you square this with looking at the Midrash for guidance? Is Paul referring to something else? I think so, but it's totally understandable, Lucas, how you would think that Paul's talking about the Midrash. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go check it out. Titus 1:14. All right, here's Titus 1. Titus 1:14. Let's see here. What is Paul talking about? Paul's saying, one of Crete's own prophets has said it. Cretans are liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. I started in verse 12. This saying is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply. Rebuke these Cretan secularists, right? Rebuke them sharply, so that they will be sound in the faith and will pay no attention to Jewish myths or to the merely human commands of those who reject the truth. And there's that phrase. And in this translation, I believe this is NIV, right? Yes, I'm in NIV. This translation chooses to say, therefore rebuke them, speaking of the Cretans, the secularists, rebuke them sharply so that they will be sound in the faith and will pay. So Paul is saying, make sure that they pay no attention to Jewish myths. And so definitely in the English, in this translation, I don't know what translation you might be using, but in this translation, you would definitely think, oh, Jewish myths. That sounds a lot like Midrash. And it's possible. That would be a very logical reading. I'm going to swing over here to look at what we're actually looking at here. So here's the word. It's actually the word that we get myth from, mutas. And I'm going to head down here. What does it mean? It means a speech, a word, a saying. Some translations that I was looking at said, pay no attention to Jewish fables. And that's one of the things the word can mean, a fiction, a fable, an invention, a falsehood. But even this Greek word has some. So let's see where it's used. Where else is this word used? I'm just in Blue Letter Bible, by the way. Okay, so this word is used and only in the pastoral epistles and once in 2 Peter. This word is used 5 times. All by Paul except for one reference by Peter. By the way, one way you could answer this is the liberal textual critic is going to say Paul didn't write the pastoral letters. So what you have here is you have a later author, a Gentile author, not Rabbi Paul. You have Gentile, Gentile Ralph. Boy, that was a weird name to pick. You have Gentile Ralph posing as Paul, and he's got a thing. He's got a thing against the Jews. So that's what he's writing. That's what maybe a more liberal textual critic might say about this. There's a Gentile agenda that's being pushed here in the letters. I'm not going to land there because I'm going to hold to the canon being, I think all the Bible is inspired. I hold the Pauline authorship. That's not popular in scholarship, like at all. Most people won't mention that they don't hold the Pauline authorship. I do. I did in my grad work. I was the odd one out that people made fun of because I believe Paul wrote the Pauline letters, including the pastoral epistles. What that means for me is I need to square whatever Paul is saying here with what he says elsewhere. Part of what he has said elsewhere is he's talked in Colossians about human regulations. And what he seems to be wound up about is halakhic interpretations. I wouldn't see Midrash here because Midrash isn't even going to be like canonized and gathered together as a thing for another century or 2. I would hear him talking about halakhic rulings, human regulations, human Jewish, the ways that like when Jews said, and who's the other person that used it? Peter, right? 2 Peter 1:16. Well, Peter is the one that learned this the hard way. You remember in the book of Acts with the sheet that comes down out of heaven and the voice that says, rise, kill, and eat. And here's Peter, and he's got to learn that his halakhic Jewish teaching says you need to eat kosher, and because you need to stay clean, you can't eat with Gentiles. You can't eat with Gentiles. So the sheet comes down from heaven and God says, rise, kill, and eat, or a voice says, rise, kill, and eat. And Peter's like, no, that's unkosher food. And I'm a Jew. I can't eat that. And the voice says, what I have called clean, what I have made clean, don't call unclean. What I call clean, don't call unclean. And Peter's like, okay, that's fine. But you called that unclean. So Roger. And the sheet goes up and the sheet comes back down and the voice says, rise, kill, and eat. And Peter's like, no, it's unclean. And the voice says, don't call unclean what I have called clean. And Peter's like, yeah, no, I got it. But you called that food unclean. And the sheet goes, and a third time it happens, right? But then Peter goes to Cornelius's house and he realized, oh, the food is unclean, but the person, the Gentile's not unclean. Nowhere in Torah did. But what is Peter wrestling with? Peter is wrestling with Jewish halakha, Jewish ruling, Jewish application. And that's what I would read him saying here. It's consistent with what Paul says in the rest of his letters. It's consistent with what we'll read because the rest of the New Testament, if I'm going to hold the inspiration, talks about, it uses Jewish Midrash. The book of Jude, shoot, that short little letter of Jude, half of that letter is Midrash. Second Peter, it's going to be full of midrash. Jesus references midrash. So somehow I have to square, however I'm going to interpret this, with what I see in the rest of Scripture. So I'm going to read that. And does that fit? First of all, let's look at, would midrash apply to 1 Timothy 1:4? Never give heed to fables and endless genealogies. Maybe it could, but it could be some. Refuse profane and old wives' fables. Well, that's not midrash. That's just going to be old wives' tales, old wives' sayings. Oh, and they shall. Let's see, 2 Timothy 4:4. They shall be turned. They're turned their ears from the truth, and they shall be turned into fables. Is that midrash? Probably not. I don't think I would read midrash into that. But the idea of Jewish fables, that definitely sounded like midrash. But when I look at the larger usage, when I look at all this other stuff here, when I look at all the ways that that word can be used, I think to myself, is there a way to read this or translate this that doesn't assume what I might say is a supersessionist and anti-Semitic bias? Is there a way to not see midrash here? And maybe, I mean, it's still clearly confronting Jewish something, but is it midrash or is it halakha? And that's how I'm going to land. Can I prove it? No. Will you have to wrestle with whether or not you agree? I think so. But it seems to me that what he's saying is he's saying, I want these secularists, these Cretans, because look what he says. Pay no attention to Jewish myths or to the merely human commands. It feels to me like what he's talking about here, these ideas go together, and these are human regulations that keep us from the freedom and the truth of the gospel. But I'll let you wrestle with what you think there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now. We'll be back. But there you go. That's how I read that. It's a great question. And you can easily see how somebody looking at that goes, doesn't sound like that to me. I read it differently. Yeah, totally get that. We'll just have to answer some of those other questions that I raised in that other perspective, but completely legitimate. I could completely respect a reading that sees that. All right. I see, boy, we're almost on schedule here. Don't applaud anymore. Let's see here. Esteline. First of all, I love the name. It's fantastic. They say Numbers 30, 3-8, lays the perimeter for the occasion when a woman might make a vow unto the Lord. When Mary, the mother of Jesus, says, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. To Gabriel, Luke 1:38, she's making a vow unto the Lord. So which set of the law would apply to her? Numbers 30, 3-5, or Numbers 30, 6-8? I'm thinking that since she was espoused to Joseph, then would Numbers 30, 6-8, based on Gabriel's visit to Joseph instead of her visiting her father? However, she was still living in her father's house. It's a great question. Here's, for those that might not be following, let me try to restate the question here from Esteline. There is, in Numbers 30, it's speaking to a patriarchal world where you have a patriarch who's in charge of an entire estate. And an adult woman in their world is often going to go to the marketplace, often going to make deals. She can buy fields. She can, Proverbs 31, the Eshet Chayil, speaks of a woman who's out making business deals and buying land and purchasing goods. And she has legal right to engage in commerce or to make contractual covenantal agreements. But Numbers is trying to give a ruling that says she can't go out and put, and this is a patriarchal world, so take a couple deep breaths because it probably sounds a little, but it's not individual bank accounts, right? She doesn't have an individual bank account she's playing with. There's a material estate that's owned by a family head. And she can't like bargain or sell his estate out from underneath him. She's not able to do that. And so Numbers 30 is saying there is a way that the patriarch, if she's married, it's her husband. If she's unmarried, it's the father, but he can ratify her pledge, her vows, or he can nullify her vows. That's what Numbers 30 is talking about. So her vows are when the husband hears or the father hears that she's made a deal, he can say, yeah, that deal's good. He can also say, no, that deal's no good. I nullify that. I don't care what she signed. No. Or Numbers 30 says the father or the husband can say nothing. And if he says nothing, it's the same as saying, yes, it's good. It's okay. So he also doesn't have to like, what did my wife do today? I'm going to say yes or no. He can also just let her do her thing. And as long as he doesn't step in and stop it, it's good. It's as good as yes. So the question here is Mary in the Christmas story, when she makes a vow, there's somebody who can nullify the vow. I love, Estelyn, I love this question. I have never thought about it. And here's why I love it. Because somebody had the ability to nullify, and it's a vow with God and whatever. But your question starts to hint at somebody heard this, whether it's Joseph or her father. And I don't know which, Estelyn. My understanding is it would be Joseph. She's now legally bound to him covenantally more than her father once she's betrothed. I could be wrong. There's a lot that we don't know. But that means that Joseph hears this vow and doesn't nullify it. Not only does he seek to divorce her quietly and not want to make this, he also is potentially, you could potentially read this, he's letting her live her life and pursue God as she feels led. And yeah, but he's also not stepping in and taking control and squashing her prayerful choices. I never have considered that, but I love the question. So good. There's some thoughts, no answers. I don't like to give answers. It's more like a Q&A. Okay, there we go. Katie says, greetings. I'm reading in Exodus chapter 32 about the golden calf. I have a couple questions. There probably are a lot of questions that come up about this chapter. And one of the laws stating that there shall be no idols before me has not been presented to the people, yet Moses is still up on the mountain. Also, it states that God is so angry that he wants to wipe the people off and start again with Moses. I just find that hard to accept. Is this being written from Moses's perspective? Perhaps, and God becomes a kind of a scapegoat. Any insights would be appreciated. Yeah, and you could see that, especially in the Deuteronomy. I think a lot of people wrestle with that question even more in Deuteronomy than in Exodus. But you could see that. I don't because of kind of my position on the inspiration of the text, and I don't typically necessarily see that in this instance, in this place that you're showing. Jewish midrash, sorry Lucas. I'm just kidding. I'm winking at you. But Jewish midrash is going to actually provide us with some insight here. The Jewish midrash notes that when you're reading the 10 commandments, the first 2 commandments are in the God speaking directly to them. Like God, like he tells all the people to come, gather at the mountain. And the first 2 commandments are in a different, what am I trying to say? Grammatically, they're speaking to the people. And then the last 8 commandments, the last 8 words are God saying, essentially speaking to Moses to tell the people. So the Jewish midrash says God started giving the commandments. And after commandment 2, the people were like, hold on. We can't do this. Moses, you need to go up and talk to God on the mountain, because if we talk to God, we're going to die. Like, we can't get through the whole list. So time out. We're done. Moses, you go talk. Which God says is, at one point in Deuteronomy, says, that's good. That's okay. I'll meet the people where they're at. But if that's the case, then they have heard the second commandment. But let's say we don't want to put our stock in that midrash. Okay, that's fine. I think the essence here is not that they haven't given a command, but who they're putting their trust in. They're putting their trust in the Egyptian god of Hathor. I don't need the 10 commandments if I'm God to be like, hey, I just rescued you, The idol's not just an abstract statue in a vacuum. The idol tells a story of the calf in Egypt is the god of war, the god Hathor. So there's it's not just about a command that they've broken, but a relationship they're betraying. So those are just some things that might give some insight to why that story might make maybe a little bit more sense when we read it. So good question, Katie. Oh man, could I have been almost any more on time? I'm about 1 minute late, but Brent, I'm ready now. I'm not going to be surprised. You can cue that music. It's time for the rapid fire response section.
I do have a whole range of sound effects here, so there's potential for more surprise. So just don't get too cocky about being on schedule.
All right. Okay. I like that. I bet there's some appropriate sounds you can use when I start to fall behind. Oh, baby. All right. Rapid fire responses. Oh, man. Why did I put this one on the rapid fire response? I'm going to have to share my screen. Greg says this. The session discussing Moses telling Pharaoh the Israelites want to take a 3-day journey and worship, questioning, did God say that? I don't understand. In Exodus 3:18, God says exactly that. Greg, you've got me nervous because I'm assuming that you're probably listening to the reboot episode. And I'm not sure what I said. I almost went back and listened to that episode to see exactly what the words were that came out of my mouth, because I'm concerned now based on your question that I misspoke. But I'm going to share my screen. This is not a rapid fire response. I should never be sharing my screen in a rapid fire response. But I'm going to share my screen so we can look at what is being said. Oh, baby, here we are. Nope. Nope, that's the wrong window. Wow, that's an infinity loop right there. Don't do that. We're going to share screen. We're going to share the right screen. We're going to share that screen. Now are we cooking with gas? That's what I'm talking about. All right. So right down here, this is what Greg is talking about. Verse 18. The elders of Israel will listen to you, and then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. So that's what God tells Moses. He says, you're going to go meet with the elders. You're going to tell the elders this stuff up here. And then you and the elders are going to go to Pharaoh and you're going to say this. Okay, so then here's what actually happens in Exodus 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron, so we're missing the elders. I don't know if that's a big deal or not, but God said you and the elders are supposed to go. But the elders and Moses aren't getting it wrong. So it's Moses and Aaron. They go to Pharaoh and they say, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness. Now, at this moment, this is what I was trying to say in the podcast. They don't actually say what God tells them to say to begin with. They talk about the Lord, the God of Israel, wants my people to go so that they may hold a festival in the wilderness. Pharaoh says, who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel? Pharaoh's like, I don't know this Adonai. So then Moses basically talks, he breaks it down to a more, so now he's no longer talking about Adonai. Do you see up here, he says Lord, Adonai, the holy name of God. Down here, he just says Elohim. That's the word that Pharaoh would understand. The God of Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, that he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. So then they eventually do say what God asked them to say, minus the Lord. But my point was, and what I meant to try to communicate, and I may have misspoke, Greg, is that Moses seems to, it takes him a couple tries to do what God asked him to do. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I don't know if that's okay. I'm not suggesting God was upset. I'm suggesting that this whole interaction seems to happen because after this interaction, there's a different response from Pharaoh. So these two different interactions seem to make a difference to me. That's what I was meaning to point out. And I'm afraid that maybe I misspoke, because earlier on when I was learning this whole line of thought, I was under the impression, Greg, that Moses came up with the whole 3-day journey thing on his own, that he made that up. And I'm afraid that my language, I may have slipped into an old language pattern and misspoke in the reboot. I hope that's not true. Because then I'll have to reboot the reboot, which is only going to take me another 8 years. from now. So that's a bummer. But yeah, so that's, hopefully that kind of helps a little bit. If you want the source, let me say this, Greg, and then I'm going to actually get into rapid fire. If you want the source that I'm being shaped by in that teaching, it's The Exodus You Almost Passed Over by Rabbi David Foreman. The Exodus You Almost Passed Over by Rabbi David Foreman. He talks about that, and he does not make a mistake. Rabbi Foreman does not screw up whatever he's trying to communicate. I screw things up often. So sorry about that. Who knows? All right, Lewis, I've been listening to the Bema podcast for several months. Grew up in a fairly strict environment. Been involved with the military first responders arm of the Navigators. That's cool. Navigators are my publishing house. I'm finding the podcast incredibly enlightening, refreshing, and challenging. I cannot overstate my gratitude for the hours you have put into creating this. While I have several reservations and wrestles, if you will, I'm experiencing God in the text in several new, delightful ways. If you're ever in this North Alabama region, come say hi. Lewis, there's no question here. I put this in here because I just wanted to say, when I read this stuff, my insides leap, because this is it. This is it. Coming from a particular worldview, and you start to open up, and I love your sentence here. You say, while I have several reservations. What? Lewis, you don't agree with everything I ever have taught in the podcast? Yes, that's perfect. That's perfect. That means you're wrestling. That means you're not just taking everything that I ever said and just believing it all, like you're wrestling with it. I just love what you said, and I love your language. That is what we look for all the time, every day. You get it, Lewis. That makes my heart happy. Davis says this. 2 rapid fire questions. What fictional piece of media do you think best describes the spiritual status of the world at the moment? How can I not say Star Wars? I'm not sure which trilogy. What if we said the Jar Jar Binks episodes? It kind of feels a little dystopian to me. I like that. You say Misa life. Misa your humble servant. Okay, I'm going to say Star Wars. Are there any events or characters in the New Testament that match up to the Old Testament Joseph or his life? The one that I've heard is Joseph lines up to Joseph. Like Joseph, the father of Jesus, lines up so closely to Joseph in Genesis. That's one take. Think of another Joseph who dreams, who God speaks to in dreams. Another Joseph who goes down to Egypt. There's a lot of parallels between Joseph and Joseph. There's also, I think, parallels a lot of people have pointed out towards the end. The last night before Jesus' crucifixion, the Passover, has a lot of Joseph parallels. So there are possibilities. There's probably more that I'm not even thinking of. Those are the 2 that immediately come to mind for rapid fire. Irene says, hello, Marty. Hello, Irene. Together with my husband, we have been listening to the Bema podcast and are well into season 4. Live in the Netherlands. Probably aren't listening to me right now. They might listen later. Today, as I was looking for a Messianic church nearby, I found a webpage about all the Messianic churches in the Netherlands and their themes and teachings. What struck me was that there were many topics on the fact that Jesus is not God. That there is no triune God. It is not allowed to pray to Jesus and worship him. He's the Messiah, not God. The Lord our God is one, Echad. I did not know Messianic Jews saw it this way, and I never heard you say something like this. So I wonder if this theology is a part of all Messianic Christian Jews, or whether it's not Messianic Christian Jews, but Messianic Jews. Oh, I didn't actually read that the first time I read that. I would appreciate it if you can take time to answer me. I will say this. It's not all Messianic Jews. That website's probably tying together with a particular worldview and a particular fellowship. I'm a part of a large Messianic Jewish fellowship with lots of diverse expressions of Messianic Judaism. It's not one expression. It's lots. And they wouldn't affirm any of that. Maybe some people in the fellowship may hold some similar views. That's not crazy. I've heard that before. There are Messianic perspectives that believe like all of Western Christianity is a farce. And so all of that ecumenical But to be quite clear, when you step out of that, you're no longer what we would call or define Orthodox. That's the definition of Orthodox Christianity. So whatever that is no longer what we understand as the ecumenical Christian faith, which matters to me. But most Messianic Judaism that I've ever interacted with, even the Messianic Judaism that I don't even love a whole lot, would typically affirm Orthodox Christianity. So not all Messianic Judaism sees it that way. That is, I don't even think I would call that normal. That is unusual. And that may just be a particular website you found about a particular kind of fellowship in the Netherlands. And it could be different in the Netherlands too. They may have a prominent showing there. Shannon says, even before finding Bema, I had been wanting to find a new church. I don't know how to do this without dragging my whole family to a bunch of churches. So my question to you is, if you had moved to a new neighborhood, how would you search for a church? It's hard to tell at face value what churches get their Second Testament understanding from deep First Testament books. Yeah, I really appreciate the question, Shannon. I don't have a quick, easy. I love how you phrased it. If I moved to a new city, how would I find a new church? First of all, if I had a church that I was coming from that shared the hermeneutic that I was looking for, like if I was moving from Idaho to Ohio and I knew the church that I was a part of viewed the Bible in a way that I wanted to, like, I want another church like that, I would always ask them who they know, because they're usually connected to friends all over the country that read the Bible in similar ways. That's one place I would start. If you can find another church, it's maybe not close enough, but if you can find any church that's like doing, and you can ask them like, well, what about, do you have any other people in this area that I can get connected with? But second of all, I go to church for a lot of reasons other than simply the biblical teaching. It's important to me, don't get me wrong. And if it's crazy teaching, that isn't. But here's my point. The church I go to now, they love me, and I get to teach and preach there about once every month or two. Every 4 to 6 weeks, I'm probably up and I get to teach. And everybody knows that when I teach, I'm going to bring historical, contextual hermeneutics to what I do. It's what I do. There's not another preacher on the teaching team that approaches the text the same way that I do. And I love it. Megan she's a spiritual director. She loves spiritual formation. So do I. And I don't care if she knows anything about the Jewish Midrash. Doesn't matter at all to me. She's going to bring something rich and beautiful and good. Jeremiah, he's got some historical contextual tools he's going to look at and use, but he's also going to bring a pastoral perspective and pastoral wisdom and exegesis to what he does. Everybody has this different take. Katie, she's going to bring like a really academic, she's a professor. She's going to bring a really academic, critical, literary perspective to what she does. Cultural, it's going to be really good, but it's going to be very different than what I do. I actually don't want to find a church that just incessantly always teaches. I want to find a church that teaches, how do I say it in a way that doesn't sound cliche? I'm no longer in rapid fire. I'm sorry. It was such a good question. You pulled me out of rapid fire response. A church is I don't want a church that is going to teach garbage. That's unhelpful and does not make me look more like Jesus. But it's not the hermeneutic alone that's going to be helpful. So I'm going to look for churches that make me into the kind of person that I love to be and don't like push away who I am and how I want to read the Bible. But I don't need everybody else to read the Bible that way. I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know why I put this in rapid fire response either. I didn't do a very good job with this section. Here we go. Scott says, I've been listening through the podcast series now on episode 127. And there Marty makes mention of the 153 fish representing all types of fish identified by the rabbis. I think he said it was Akiva who identified that there were 153 different kinds of fish. Is there a reference for that? I have not found one in the Talmud or Mishnah, and I have searched through. Any help would be appreciated. Yes, Scott, the reference is actually secondhand, which matters, academically anyway. And the reference is from Jerome. who's actually a Christian author, and Jerome says that that was Akiva's teaching. Now you can find, I'm almost positive I've found it before. The teaching is built on, the larger Jewish teaching is built off of the gematria of Ezekiel 37. Nope, not 37. That's dry bones. Ezekiel 47, where the fishermen are standing on the banks of the Jordan River, and they're catching fish from En Eglaim all the way to En Gedi, the Dead Sea. I think it's the Dead Sea. But the gematria, according to the rabbis, and I think Akiva may actually have been the one that pointed this out, En Eglaim is going to be, the gematria is going to be 153. So that's where Akiva, we assume, connects 153 different kinds of fish from not obviously not John, not the Gospel of John, but from Ezekiel 47. We also have teaching from the rabbis, and I think you could find this on Sepharia, that connect the same concept to the vine that grows over Jonah. Now remember, Jonah is a teaching all about the Gentiles and God's love for the Gentiles. And there is a midrash that says that the vine that grew over Jonah had 153 leaves on it. Those rabbinic teachings are talking to each other. I am not confident that they're in the Mishnah or the Talmud. I can't remember if they're Agadah. I can't remember if they're other commentary. I don't have any strong memory that they're Mishnah or Talmud, but that's the reference. Marco, hi, my question is on episode 92. Toward the end, Marty is making a connection with the Old Testament and the three temptations that Jesus resisted in comparison to the Israelites in the desert. Marty only covers two of them, and then it was the end of the episode. What is the third test that the Israelites had? Thank you. I love Bema. It's such a great tool to learn the text. Well, I'm hoping, Marco, that you listen to session 1, because that's actually where we talk about the three tests in great depth and detail. So I hope you didn't skip ahead to session 3, because that would be very naughty. It is the 2 episodes that are called, Brent might give me some episode numbers here, With All Your Heart, and then there's another episode that's called With All Your Soul and Very. And heart, soul, and very are the 3 tests. And it's the test of Shema. And the reason I didn't bring it up in the Matthew 20 and 21 is what Brent says, episode 20 and 21. That's where you can go back in session 1 and listen to the 3 tests in detail. I was kind of hoping people would remember that and go back to that, because the third test is kind of this debated thing amongst the rabbis. Is the third test the battle with the Amalekites? Or is it sticking up for your brother? Is it fighting on behalf of other people? Not literal fighting, but like, is it laying down your life, being willing to lay down your life for others? Or is the third test living in the promised land? In the book of Numbers, it seems to be the Amalekites. In Deuteronomy, it seems to be living in the promised land. Is the third test loving God with all of your blessings and your resources? It seems to be the latter to me when I read Jesus's temptation story. But I didn't want to just passingly talk about that. So those are your reference points. So hopefully that helps. Marco. Alex says, I just noticed that in Luke, it says Mary goes down to Elizabeth after hearing that she was in her 6th month of pregnancy, and then stayed with her 3 months before returning home. Alex, I had never thought of this before. Is there anything in the text or Jewish tradition that would help us know if Mary would have stayed for John's birth or left before? I know it says that she left, and then it says John was born, but I know the Bible has a lot of overall summary sections and then goes back a bit to show the specific. Yeah, Alex, I don't know. It's a great question. I've never thought of it before. Golly, is so good. I do think the language might suggest that she left before he was born, but is it possible? Absolutely. I mean, the timeline's right there. Who knows? I'll tell you somebody who's been blowing my mind recently. I don't know, Alex, if you know Benjamin Casperson. I don't know if he's in the comments tonight. He's usually hanging around. He's usually lurking in our live stream. He's our director of finance here at Impact Campus Ministries. And he and Josh were really close, and they studied the text like crazy. Ben Casperson knows all kinds of fun stuff about the Midrash, and he's been blowing my mind with Midrash about Zechariah and John the Baptist. So he may even have some insight into that question. If you know Benjamin, you should reach out, Alex. If you don't know Benjamin, you should connect, because who knows? But he's going to have all kinds of wonderful little tasty goodies. Jennifer says, going back through all the podcasts and redoing them as I lost my study Bible in a fire in March. No. Oh, Jennifer, it's horrible. In the discussion of the Magi, I wonder if you're aware of a tiny text that has been translated from the Vatican Library called The Revelation of the Magi, which is written from their point of view. I am aware of that text, Jennifer. It makes me smile, not in a disparaging way. I've come to find a little soft spot in my heart for the apocryphal works that are out there. I don't have any big points of view. I'm aware of it. And I think I even may have had an assignment where I had to read a part of it. But I'm not sure if I don't believe I've read the whole thing. But I do know that it's out there. And it's fun to think about. It's fun to think about. It's a fun thought experiment, if nothing else. Sarah says, when you do the episode on Jacob and talk about how he brings up the rear, I'm a little confused. When I read the story, it says he himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Am I interpreting it wrong? He says he lined up his kids, concubines, and wives in order of preference, but then it says he went on ahead and bowed down before his brother. It doesn't seem cowardly to me, and I'd love to get your feedback. Yeah, that's really good, Sarah. I think the text is pretty clear that when he takes a party and he sends them ahead, the language in the Hebrew certainly gives the impression he sends them ahead. He sends the second group ahead. And when this says ahead, it's not ahead of them. It's directional in the Hebrew. So this is simply saying that he gets and he goes on. He went on to Esau. He didn't stay in the same spot and wait for Esau to come on. He went ahead. He went on. Not that he went ahead of. Like you'll notice in the translation you're quoting here, it doesn't say he went ahead of them. He didn't go in front of them. There are ways you could say that in the Hebrew. But this is he went on. He went ahead. He went on there. Not ahead of them. He already sent them ahead. He sent them first. He sent another group second, and then he went ahead third, would be another way we could say that. And I've never heard anybody make a case other than that, but it's a good question. It's a good question. I'm not sure if there's room to make that case. I don't know, but it's definitely not how I'm reading it. Kelly says, I heard a message that discussed the shepherds. The speaker explained that there were Levitical shepherds that raised sacrificial lambs. He explained that the lambs were to be without blemish, that the shepherds could wrap them in cloth to protect them. Can you verify? No, I cannot, Kelly. It's a very popular, like a pop history fact that makes its way into many a Christian sermon and lesson. And it's just kind of one of those trendy poppy things. And it doesn't mean that it's not true, but it's not a historically grounded fact. I cannot verify. In fact, I would almost say the opposite. I would say that's not historical. It belongs in the same category of this urban legend that there was a small gate called the Eye of a Needle, and once the gates are closed, the camel has to get down on its knees and crawl through the Eye of the Needle. Same category. It's just not a historical truth. So there you go. Can I verify? No. How's that for rapid fire response? Suzanne says, when Jesus turned water into wine, were the jars a set of Pharisee purification jars? Very possible. Yes. They talk about being jars for ceremonial washing, which you would assume are jars for mikvah. It's going to be a Pharisaical world there in Cana. Cana is a Hasidim town. So whether it's zealot or whether it is Pharisee, it is definitely from the Pharisaical worldview. So you would assume those are Pharisaical purification jars. Jonah says, I'm looking for the episode where David is being chased from Saul and gets the holy bread from the priest. What was the teaching behind that? We didn't have one. If you're looking for the episode, it doesn't exist. That's my rapid fire response. If I wanted to wink and kind of point at you, there is a story that we don't talk about in the podcast. David is on the run from Saul. He shows up to the priests. He and his men that are with him are hungry, and the priest decides to give him the holy bread. And Jesus calls back to that story when the Pharisees are all upset about his disciples eating grain on the Sabbath, like, you can't do that. And Jesus is like, don't you remember the story of David? The holy thing to do is not to protect the holiness. It's to serve others and protect human life. So do you protect the sacred sanctity, or is the sacred sanctity actually human life itself? Do you heal? Jesus is trying to say, do you feed the hungry? Do you heal the hurting? Do you put the world back together? Or do you say, no, we can't do any of that because we got to keep everything holy? And he calls to that story to say, we know the answer to that. Becky says, I just started listening to session 3, already finished 1 and 2. In the intro, Marty mentions that prayer warriors don't exist. Can you explain this, or at least guide me where I can get more information on this? I will tell you what, Becky, I cannot wait to do the reboot of session 3, because I will not make that comment, and I will never have to answer this question again. I am not mad at you, but I get this question so much. And had I known how many people would end up listening to that podcast one day, I was just joking around. It was an inside joke between me and a good buddy named Jim. And Jim is somebody that I like to call a prayer warrior. He is. And Jim hates it when I call him a prayer warrior, because Jim says there's no such thing as a prayer warrior. We're all supposed to pray. There aren't people that are called specifically to prayer. We're all supposed to pray. And Jim and I always had a little back and forth, a little, I elbow him and he elbows me. And because I think he has a real gift to pray for people. And he gets real mad when people say that, because he thinks we all should be doing that. And I appreciate that. So I was just winking and nudging Jim when I made that joke. And boy, did I confuse hundreds, maybe thousands of people with that dumb joke that I made. So Jim is actually on that episode. So what you can't hear and what you can't see is Jim kind of like giving me the little stink eye and kind of like laughing. He's kind of got this little bouncy laugh that he has. So you can't see him doing that as I say that. So you just missed that. And my joke was a big bummer, because now I have to answer that question every month or so. So there you go, Becky. There's your answer. All right, that's it. Play the music. Oh, Brent, we should have never let you find more sound effects.
What I'm really lacking at this point, I think, is a nice womp 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 trombone sound.
Womp womp womp. Well,
could you use that a couple of times?
Yep.
Could you use that? What's this doing in rapid fire? I should never have put this here. Womp womp.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we always stop in the middle, and we always in every live stream, and I say this every time, but it's because I want people to know that I'm serious. This isn't just a passing thing that we do in the middle of every live stream because it's time to do it. We do it in the middle of every live stream because we want to always say thank you every single month. And this month, maybe more than ever, Brent, because we just got done with year-end giving. If you follow me on social media, you saw me probably the last 3 days of the year do a little update and a little plea and say, hey, last 3 days, we need $240,000 and help us hit our goal. And the support of our ministry is always just so encouraging. But those last 3 days, the last 24 hours are bananas. We needed 150 going into the last 24 hours. I think 173 when we went to bed the night before. And it all came in. It all came in that last 24 hours. And so right now in January, like every January, we're just feeling very humbled and blessed and full of gratitude. And we want to say thank you for everybody there are the people that give every month consistently. I don't care if it's $10 or $20 or $50, but they give every single month and it never stops. And then you have people that give every single month, and at the end of the year, they give us a little extra. So they give the $50 a month, but then they give us like a little $300 gift at the end of the month, at the end of the year, which is incredible. And then you have people that own businesses or work in agriculture, and their cash flow works differently. and they just drop these checks on us on those last days of the tax year. And when you put it all together, it's pretty great. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I mean, I wasn't even sure if you're going to share anything, because I was like, what do you mean? I feel like we just said this, because earlier today we recorded the session 10 intro episode. Session 10 is coming very soon.
Yes.
And we talked about it there. So I thought maybe you were going to just make people wait and listen to that. But I guess,
Hey,
live Q&A people get special treatment.
For the few people that show up to watch these things, there's got to be some little juicy tidbit that we give them that we don't give to anybody else. It's an exclusive club, live stream club.
Yeah.
What do you got here? You got a couple quick questions that came in.
Well, yeah, a couple quick questions. But I'll just say on behalf of myself, I look forward to writing probably dozens of thank you letters in the next month or so in response to a lot of those gifts. But I'm not even going to come close to being able to reach out to everybody. So I wish so much that I could sit down with everybody and say thank you, but know that every single gift is super meaningful to us, and we're here because of your generosity. So thank you for that. But I had a couple people, we should have said this at the top of the Q&A, but how do people submit questions, Marty?
Well, here's the thing. It's not something that we love to advertise or thoroughly encourage, because if people start, one of the things we're not trying to do, everybody, and I don't mean this to be, we're not trying to be the Bible answer man. Like, we're not trying to be the place that you go, like a Bible encyclopedia. We do want to have fun with it. And sometimes there are those just itching questions that you got to ask, but we don't want to encourage, we want to give you guys the tools to study, to read, to ask the right questions out there using the resources you can find online and elsewhere, and wrestle with the answers. We don't want everybody to always be coming to us of, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? But there's a couple things that we do. Number one, people use our contact form on our website, and we gather all those emails that come in. We cannot answer all the questions. We simply can't. I love to take questions that are good questions, that have a good spirit behind them, or a curiosity. And I try to curate the questions that come in and curate the parking lot list that we use on nights like tonight. Most of everything I'm reading you are contact form email submissions. And you can do that, and that's great. The more that come in, the more
I would say the great thing about the contact form is that there are a number of questions that we get a lot. So much so that you've recorded probably a couple dozen videos so far of here's something we get all the time. I've had a few of those, actually. I've got a handful of live questions, and a few of those I'm going to get back to and say, actually, Marty already has an answer for that in this video.
Yep.
So
100%.
If you do that, you're going to get that response almost immediately versus having to wait, because some of these questions are from back in November, because it's just been that long since we...
Yeah.
So you'll get a faster response that way for the things when we have an FAQ video or something else. And then it also allows us to kind of direct that traffic, because some of these questions are better suited for Reed or for Brian David if it's chiasm stuff, or something for L. So it allows us to kind of filter that way a little bit.
Yeah. And I will say this, guys, these live streams, we don't do a good job of what we want to do. What we want to do is have some questions from our parking lot, but these live streams are supposed to be live streams. We want to interact with you in the comments, and it's my fault, because Brent asked me to do it, and I have a hard time saying no. I read a question that's sent in via email, and I just see a person behind it, and I see a heart behind the question. I have a hard time not putting it in the document, and I need to say more no's to that so I can say more. Brent says he's got 9 questions that he's curated from the live comments right now, and that's not all the questions that have come in the comments. Those are just the ones that he's picked out, and he's letting me know I got 9 live questions, but I'm not sure. He doesn't want to get in my way.
That's all of them. That's all of them.
Okay,
that's all that's all the questions.
That's what we want to do, and we're trying to get better at it. And I know, I can't remember, is it Devin? There's somebody that's always in our live streams, and he's always been very gracious, and he's always let us know, these are a lot more fun when you interact with us and not the people that emailed you. Great point. And I want to do better. I want to do better at that.
we're doing what we can. We're doing what we can.
Yeah.
But without further ado, then let's get back to the questions.
Shoot, now I'm all inspired to just plow through these questions so that I can grab all 9 live questions, because that's Chad and Charles, the two that kind of asked, like, how do you submit questions? The goal isn't actually, Chad and Charles, that you would use the contact form, unless it's actually something you're trying to ask the team. The goal is that you'd be able to be here asking those questions right where you asked that question. So instead of saying,
one of them subsequently submitted a question, so they figured it out.
Boom, they got it. Okay, here we go. I'm just so inspired to get there. Nikki says, I've been listening to the podcast for about 1.5 years. I'm currently on season 3 after hearing Marty preach at a church in Charlottesville. Hey, Nikki. Like so many others, my mind has been exploding in the best way possible. I found myself at a crossroads that I imagine many listeners eventually reach. I'm struggling to reconcile the reality that the Old Testament is a Jewish text written for Jewish people, yet as it sits within a Christian Bible that in many ways has historically rejected Judaism. At times, it feels uncomfortably close to a form of theological colonialism. Absolutely. Yes, that is at the heart of the Bema Project. And a lot of other scholarship. Bema is the fruit of a whole school of scholarship that has recognized exactly what you're saying, Nikki. My father is Jewish, though I was raised in the Christian faith. He's shared that our family comes from the house of Levi, something that never really held much meaning for me until recently, but now feels newly significant as I'm re-examining these questions. I wonder if there are resources you typically recommend, for people who find themselves at this particular intersection of faith, history, and identity. It's such a good question and a meaningful question. It's at the heart of my own journey. That's my journey. And you probably have picked that up in the podcast. I have Jewish heritage and identity that I wasn't raised in. It feels very similar to what you're talking about. Your father is Jewish, but you were raised in a Christian faith. I don't know how those dynamics played together. But I totally get it. And then it's just so complicated and nuanced that there are no easy answers, Nikki, because what do you do with a Torah written to a patriarchal world? Because I'm making an assumption, Nikki, that you're probably female. In the world of Torah, your identity ends up being tied to, if you're married, your husband, whatever patriarchal family house you belong to. Is that how we do it today? Not really. But how do you reconcile that with a Torah speaking to a world back then? It was easier. What I'm trying to say is it was easier for me as a male to wrestle with this question because it was more straightforward. It's more difficult for you to wrestle with this question because there's an added layer of complexity that I just want to acknowledge. And it's not my place to say where it ends. You're not asking for that. You're asking for resources. And I don't have a bunch of resources. I had a few voices that were very helpful in the way that they encouraged me, Jewish and Gentile voices, that encouraged me to just keep going and figure it out. And I have just enough narcissistic tendencies inside of me that I had all the confidence I needed to just make my own way and chart my own course and figure it out on my own. But not everybody is like that. Not everybody has those same. I didn't have any resources. Eventually, I found a really cool fellowship, and it's called Yachad B'Yeshua, and it's for ethnic Jews. It's not for people that want to become Jewish. It's not for Hebrew roots, Gentiles that think they ought to follow Torah. This is for people that come from Jewish heritage. Most of them were raised in a Jewish home of varying levels of Torah observance. And I don't know, with your story, you say your father's Jewish. I don't know if he was a practicing Jew, but being in that fellowship has been a resource. I'm not talking about books. I'm talking about relationships and stories and testimonies and expressions that have been very helpful for me. But unfortunately, I don't have a ton of resources. And honestly, it would be very tricky and difficult to write or make a resource that would function well in that space. It's a great question. And I don't know if it makes my heart hurt that it's tricky. It's tricky. And there's a gravity to that I want to recognize. So there you go. There's my non-answer to that. Mark says this. He's been listening to Bema on continuous mode, one right after the other. And a couple of big things that are resonating with him are knowing when to say enough, empire versus shalom, and being thankful. 3 things. I'm reaching out for 2 reasons: to say how much I am appreciating the podcast. You're welcome and thank you. And to ask for help to figure out how to get back to shalom, to be thankful for what God has provided and continues to provide. On the latter, we're consumed with making disciples, bringing people to Christ. We are losing sight as to how to walk alongside these new disciples as they study the text and ask really tough questions. I would say there's no quick answer to this. This is the life of spiritual formation, Mark. The slow work. Like, there's a favorite prayer we have around here. It's not a Jewish prayer. It's a prayer of Desjardins, and it talks about, in fact, I'm sure Brent can find a link and he'll throw it in the comments. The slow work of God is a prayer by Desjardins. The slow work of God. And that is in so many ways what you're talking. It's just the process of discipleship, and discipleship is the slow work of God, the slow journey of rooted, real spiritual transformation. But if I were going to offer an answer beyond that, I would say at the end of season 5, we end up talking about the 4 pillars of Bema. And it's how I distilled my answer to this question. If I were to give myself to 4 things that I feel like would make a difference to what you're talking about, you actually had your own 3 things. When to say enough, empire, you had your own 3 pillars. I've had 4 pillars because I think they are the vehicle, not just themes, but the vehicle to aid in that transformation. And that is the text, community, discipleship, and wrestling. I meant to say 4. Community, text, discipleship, wrestling. And those 4 things are where I go back. Patient Trust by Desjardins is what Brent, I believe, is linking in the comments. All right. Daniel says this. This is a Bible question that I'll bring up to your Q&A. I wonder if Daniel's here. Maybe he's one of the live questions. But he said he was going to bring it to the Q&A today. He sent it ahead of time. He said, recently reading the Christmas story, it occurred to me that Joseph was the only person in the nativity story to whom the angel spoke in a dream. On top of that, he spoke to him 4 times, all in dreams. I've been listening to your podcast for the last year or so, and I'm practicing messing around with Remez. So I wondered, is this a Remez? Is Matthew trying to make me think of an Old Testament character? I love where your head's at, Daniel. I absolutely love it. I just love it. I love it when people start asking that question and thinking that way. It just is so good. I looked through my Blue Letter Bible app at all the instances in Scripture where dreams occurred and found that only a handful of people actually had dreams where God spoke to them. I looked at Daniel, Solomon, Jacob, Joseph, and Abimelech. The last example in that list is the one which stood out to me. Here's my observations. Abimelech was the last person God spoke to in a dream in Scripture. Joseph was the last. Abimelech was the first person God spoke to in a dream. Joseph was the last. Abimelech was an unrighteous man. Matthew tells that Joseph was a righteous man. Abimelech was told not to marry Sarah. Joseph was told to marry Mary. Both Abimelech and Joseph were involved with women who had miraculous birth stories. Without studying any of the Greek or the Hebrew, that's as far as I've gotten. I would love to know if there's any other juicy connections between Septuagint and Matthew. But I think Matthew was written in the Hebrew, so actually it would be the other way. But I digress. Daniel, I absolutely love where your head is at, and there's like a redemptive, almost like a chiastic rhythm. There's almost like a reversal. You found 4 parallels there that are pretty juicy to me, and they don't necessarily form anything in my mind yet, but I love where your head is at and what you found there. And shoot, maybe Brian David's screaming over there in the comments. Brian David likes to listen to us whenever we get close to a chiasm, and he starts to just shout into the nether about how ignorant we are. And that's what I love about him. So he might be just shouting into the comments in all caps, "This is what it is, and it's amazing." And I wouldn't doubt it for a moment. I love where your head's at, Daniel. I just love where your head's at. It's great. Keep going. Adrian says, I feel confused by 1 Corinthians 10. Paul says you can eat meat sacrificed to idols because an idol is nothing, but then it's like he flips and says you also can't because demons are behind these idols. I just feel very confused. Well, you're not the first, Adrian. A lot of liberal textual scholars are going to say this is evidence that Paul didn't write the whole letter of Corinthians, that there's actually two letters that are being sewn together. I completely disagree, but they too see the same thing. They see a dissonance. They see a contradiction. People say, and then goes on to comment about some other things. I'm reading 1 Corinthians 10. I'm super confused what's going on and what Paul is warning against. I need help. Well, second of all, I've already said first of all. Second of all, Adrian, I just love anybody that says I need help. It's a great posture to have. May the smartest among us, may the most educated, well-versed scholars ever in our midst always be willing to say what you're willing to say. I don't understand this. I need help. That's just such a beautiful posture. Don't ever lose it. Don't ever lose it when studying the scripture. I'll tell you how this is one of my favorite lessons. I do this when I'm in Turkey with my students. When we're in Turkey trips this June, I'll be in Turkey, and I do a whole afternoon on this. It's one of my favorite lessons. I will not be able to do the whole afternoon right now. But here's the gist. The gist of this is Paul's argument. You have to take it all the way. I think it's from chapter 4, might be chapter 8. It's at least chapter 8 through, I think it might start in chapter 4. I can't remember now. I want to say it starts in chapter 8. There is like 3 to 4 to 5 chapters of the letter where Paul's making actually not a contradictory argument, a pretty seamless one. And what he's trying to get at is the meat is not a problem. The meat doesn't have demons. The meat is fine. You can eat the meat. The problem that you got to be worried about is relationships. The problem is not the meat. The meat is who cares? The meat is meat. It doesn't matter about the meat. What matters is people. And some people understand that the meat is just meat. Like some people understand it's just meat. But some people don't understand that it's just meat. And they see it, and they see demons. They see idolatry. And Paul says, you and I know it's just meat. So you can eat the meat. But if your eating of meat ever gets in the way of what somebody else sees in God, you can't eat the meat. So it feels like this contradiction. You can eat the meat, you can't eat the meat. You can't, but that's because we view everything as a static moral code. We view everything as a ethical, you can or you can't, you can or you can't. Paul's trying to actually, the irony is that's the last thing Paul's trying to get us to do. He's trying to get us to realize it's not about the ethical code. It's not about what you're permitted to do. He says that everything's permissible, but not everything's constructive. Everything's permissible, but not everything is beneficial. It's not about the meat is fine. Everything's permissible. But you have to use your freedom in a way, Paul will say this in the letter, you have to use your freedom in a way that enables other people to move towards Christ. So if you ever use your freedom in a way that gets in the way of people seeing the goodness of God, because they're ignorant, they don't understand that meat is meat. They think that meat is idol meat. They think that meat is demonic. They think that meat is immoral. You cannot eat just because you have the freedom to eat and get in the way of what they get to see in God. So you have to sacrifice your freedom so that they can come to Jesus. It's literally one of my favorite lessons. So there you go. Come to Turkey and we can do it. We can do the long form. Okay. Yeah. Oh, somebody is in the comments. Who is Monkey Pelt? I have to know them because they say goated site in Turkey. So they must have been with me. And it was epic. It's my favorite. It's my favorite. But I do want to know who Monkey Pelt is because that's just a juicy little handle. Okay. Tabitha, I'm listening to episode 97, Done in Secret, and something hit me that I wanted to share. When you talk about how Jesus is radical in inviting humans into forgiveness process, I realize that in inviting us to forgive, he's also saying that wrongs done against us are actually debts against us. If you hurt me, that's exclusively between you and God, then I have no right to forgive. I love and there's a long message that Tabitha wrote here, but her point is if Jesus is inviting us into the process of forgiveness, then another part of what Jesus is saying is that it's not just a spiritual thing about them and God. It's acknowledging the fact that I have been wronged. It's not just a sin between them and God. It's also a sin between them and me. It gives me a chance to say, what was done against me is truly wrong and unjust. And I love, Tabitha, if I might have misunderstood what you're saying, but if I understood what you're getting at, I love your point. Because so often when we talk about forgiveness, it gets misconstrued as, well, what they did doesn't matter. And part of, like, when we rush to forgiveness too quickly, there's no acknowledgement of the wrong that was done to us. And that's a part of the healing process. And so you recognizing, I kind of love that, Tabitha. And I think I'm going to steal that and hopefully remember to give you credit and work that into the way that I talk about forgiveness when I bump into that. Because I think it's a fantastic perspective. And I thank you for sharing it. Oh, it's Hunter. Monkey Pelt is Hunter. That's wonderful. Makes me smile. Hunter, hearts. Will this computer do my thing? It won't. Oh, well. Heart Hunter. Okay, Alex says, I noticed that almost every time the 12 tribes are mentioned, someone is left off the list in some way. For example, sometimes the tribe of Levi is left off because they are the priests and are set apart and don't have inheritance like the rest. Absolutely. Other times, Joseph is called a tribe instead of mentioning the half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Absolutely. Those are two examples I understand. But in other situations, like blessings or numberings, other tribes are left out too. Simeon is not mentioned in Deuteronomy 33 in Moses' final words. Dan is left out in the numbering of the 12,000 sealed from the tribe. I know that there are more specific in the Old Testament, and I've come across before. I get that it's part to make the 12 instead of 13, but I don't really understand why or how they choose to leave a tribe out. I don't know if there's always... What I would love to know, Alex, it's a great question, and you're totally right, and you've seen something that's, I think, beautiful. What I'm not sure about is if there's always some treasure, cool little reason, or if it's just the way the author... I'm sure that sometimes there are treasures. I'm not sure that every single time there's a treasure, but it's just the way that the author has chosen to count the 12. You're absolutely... The Levi one makes sense. You'd leave the Levi out because they didn't have an inheritance, and the two half tribes make 12. The two that you are struggling with also make sense, but I also wonder sometimes if there's treasures buried there. Simeon makes sense because Simeon was swallowed up in Judah. If you ever look at a map, Judah is given this huge territory, and Simeon sits right in the middle of Judah. And over time, Simeon and Judah become one thing. So now you have to essentially add a tribe in order to get 12. And so the authors are doing that. But Simeon and Judah being, when you split into two kingdoms, North Kingdom and South Kingdom, the South Kingdom just becomes Judah, and Simeon just becomes absorbed into Judah. So that's the Simeon absorption is what I would call that. The Dan one makes sense because it's kind of, I think I spoke to this in the podcast. Dan chooses to go up north, forsake their calling that God gave them, the inheritance God wanted them to have. They went up north and then literally got pummeled out of existence. Like the tribe of Dan gets obliterated because they don't settle where God tells them to settle. And they go all the way up north and they get hammered by every single invading army that comes in from the north and is no more. And they're no more because they said no to what God's plan was. And so the Bible's trying to say, well, that was Dan's legacy. They didn't want to do what God said, asked them to do, and they're no more. They're not in the list anymore. So there are reasons for why they're not included. And I think there's some fun little ditties there. Judy says, I don't know if this is worth your time or the right space to ask, but I've been trying to find work and listening to Bema, and I just started session 4. I've been meditating on how to find companies that are focused on shalom and not empire. How do I find work that glorifies God and pays the bills? I feel like there should be a way to search for this without sounding holier than thou. I'm getting frustrated with myself. I can't seem to figure out what God wants me to do. What do you think I should do? How do I turn the volume up on God and turn everything else down without isolating from people or God that might be trying to speak through? How do you look for work? And there's some layers in there, Judy, that I probably am not going to be able to speak to all of it. The big idea is you're trying to find holy, sacred work is the big idea. How do you find that when so much of what you find doesn't feel? And I would say, actually, you're tapping into something that's at the heart of our organization and at the heart of what I'm trying to teach every single college student. But you're not gonna find a place to go belong to. This is the call of every single Christian, to go out into a world of chaos and go be shalom. There's another lesson I do in Israel where we go to the Jordan River and we talk about the baptism of Jesus. And we talk about how Jesus was willing to not just stay in his heavenly place, but he was willing to take on human flesh. And he comes and he steps into our literal chaos and then invites us to do the same, right? And so we kind of experience that by getting into the Jordan and getting into the chaos, the watery chaos, but saying, I'm going to climb in and I'm going to make a difference. You're not going to find a whole industry or a whole company of shalom. I mean, they exist, but I wouldn't look for that because God's trying to bring shalom to all the chaos companies. So you want to find the right fit of a place where you can get in, and you're still not going to probably change the entire company, but God's going to call you to a particular, I call it your little chunk of dirt. And God says, I want you to bring shalom to that little chunk of dirt. I have all these students that have graduated in the ROTC program, and a lot of them went to work in military intelligence. Like that's their 9 to 5 for years, for decades, for some of them, has been working in military intelligence. And they'll call me sometimes a few years in and they'll be like, Marty, the things that I know and the things that I see, it's really hard to know what kingdom looks like. And over time, what they discover is, all right, I'm not responsible for the whole thing. It's not my responsibility. I'm responsible for my thing. And I'm going to bring shalom to my thing. And that's going to flow down the line. And it may even overflow up the line. And it may even overflow on the sides of the line. But my job is to bring shalom to the peace that God has entrusted to me. I'm not responsible for my neighbor. I'm not responsible for, I mean, I am, but I'm not responsible for their chunk and their call. I'm responsible to support them. I'm responsible to bring shalom to my chunk of dirt. And I think that's what I hear in your question. Kate, we're almost, golly, Brent, we may get to some live questions. Got a sound effect for that? Nothing. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Kate, and I'm not sure if I know. That's what I'm talking about. That's what we're looking for. I'm trying to figure out if I know this Kate or not. I'm not sure if I know this Kate. When I first saw the name, I'm like, I know who that Kate is. And then the more I read the question, the more like, I don't know if this is the Kate that I'm thinking of. But Kate says she wants to express her condolences for the passing of Josh. A lot of people sent messages that started with that, and I didn't read it. So thanks for everybody that is thinking of us, grieving with us, praying with us, and expressing that. We appreciate that. It means a lot for people to witness the lament. It's a part of the healing. Secondly, she wants to say thanks for the podcast. You're welcome, Kate. I love your kind words. And then she gives some backstory. It's kind of a longer message. And then she says 2 things that stand out to her: communion and apostles versus disciples. First of all, communion. What's the deal with communion? Kate says. In my previous faith group, we referred to them as emblems. You had to be baptized before you should take part in communion. And it happened every Sunday at a home church. I could get into a lot of that. But there's other churches that view it differently. what's the deal with communion? And then secondly, there's apostles versus disciples. And she talks about some of the traditions that she was, again, raised in, had a very mechanical, direct, straightforward, categorized understanding of apostles are people that are sent out to do the work. There's apostles but then there's disciples, and what role does apostle play? And I think I will kind of attack your question this way, Kate, and I will say these are great questions, and you're absolutely right that when you go to different corners of Christianity, when you visit different traditions in Christendom, they're going to interact with these ideas differently. I have a tradition that I belong to, and my tradition has answers to your questions. And quite frankly, they're going to be upset that I'm not just going to answer your question. But what I try to do in these live streams and what I try to encourage in our content is to realize that this big, wide Christian family that we're a part of engages these concepts and ideas in different ways, and not all of them are created equal. Some ways I'm sure I would say that's more wrong than right. I'm not sure I would ever have the hubris to say what I do is completely right with no wrong. That feels a little arrogant and awkward. But there are other ways of doing things, and there's a lot of beauty in those other expressions. I would say that. And so part of in my next book, you're going to hear me talk a little bit about this. And when I wrote my rough draft, I talked a lot about it, and they took it out. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about in that book was Karen Swallow Prior wrote in her book, and she's not the one to come up with this phrase because I've read it in other people too, but she's the one that I read the most about. Part of what we do in theology is we engage in what's called meaning making. Meaning making. When we get together in faith, use theology to make meaning. Communion is this beautiful thing that the church has been doing for 2,000 years. And it has been shaped by history, and it has found different expressions, even within one single faith tradition. Even if we were just to follow communion through the life of Catholicism, like the most ancient expression of Christianity, it has changed and evolved and been expressed in different ways, in different contexts, and all within the bounds of their own tradition. You could step into a Lutheran faith and the Reformers, who probably express something very similar and yet different. And then you can go into another tradition like the one you're speaking about, which takes communion every single Sunday. And it's not a sacrament because they don't even understand it. They're emblems. You can talk consubstantiation and transubstantiation, and you can talk about the idea of symbols and emblems. You talk about the body and the blood. I have a buddy of mine, really close friend of mine, who's an Episcopal or ordained Episcopal. Man, does he carry the title of priest? I can't remember. But he's a buddy of mine who's Episcopal, and he can deliver the sacraments in a Episcopal setting. And he led us in the Eucharist the other day, and it's a different faith tradition than what I'm used to. It's not the one that I go to every Sunday. And he believes that something happens to the bread and the juice. And when we were all done with the Eucharist, there was only a handful of us, and there was some leftover bread and some leftover juice. But for my buddy, it was not bread and juice. It was the body and the blood of Jesus. And so there are only a few ways that he, as an ordained minister of sacrament, can dispose of the body and blood of Jesus. And that's not the world that I go. I don't spend my time every Sunday in that kind of a faith tradition. But boy, was it fun to talk about it and engage it. And his community, his faith tradition, has found a way to make meaning out of all that. Apostles and disciples. it's fun to take that language and take the principles that are being discussed in those passages and make meaning with those things. Make meaning. So, but when we start to make meaning, and I think part of what I'm trying to say is when we start to say it's the only meaning, and we're the only ones that have found the right meaning, and everybody else is wrong. It just feels like crazy to me. Like that just feels crazy, and that doesn't mean I can't have deep convictions about the way that I do things. I like how I view the Eucharist and communion. It does not mean it's the only way, and it's just bananas to me when we start talking like that. But I could be crazy. All right. Brent suggests we do some rapid fire live questions. Let's see if I can actually do rapid fire. Do you want to play the music again? We're closing out with rapid fire. Elaine on Facebook. I'm reading The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. He references a position that Genesis 1 through 11 was either written during the Babylonian exile or edited while there, scribes wanting to make clear that certain religious ideas about the gods and the world were misguided or false. What's your thinking on this? I don't want to tell you my thinking on this because there's all kinds of people listening to our podcast in all kinds of different places. But I can tell you it's a very prominent scholarly idea. Yeah. There's all kinds of sense that while they're in Babylonian exile, a lot of your scriptures redacted. Actually, I don't know where you're at in the podcast, Elaine, but when you get to season 3, and please don't skip ahead for anybody who's not there, you're going to get to an episode towards the beginning of season 3 where we talk about the Bible and how it was formed and when it was put together and how all that happens. And the reality, you're asking about what's my thinking. I believe that the Bible as we have it, I would grab it, but it's too far down. And I don't want to waste time. But the Bible as we have it was compiled and put together in a process called redaction. And I don't think that hurts inspiration for a moment. I think it's inspired as the day is long. But that redaction process happened in Babylonian exile, which means that context can easily be shaping the things that we're reading in an inspired way. Part of what I'm trying to do in Bema is teach people the Bibles we have are inspired. They're not inspired because they're agendaless. They're not inspired because they don't have a bias. They're inspired because they're inspired because I'm not rapid fire responding this at all. Sorry, Brent. They're inspired because the agenda and the bias is God's. It's God's people. It's full of wisdom. That's why it's inspired. We tend to think inspiration because it doesn't have a bias, because it doesn't have an agenda. No. It's inspired because it's God's agenda. That's why it's inspired. So there you go. All right. Michaela says on YouTube, we've been talking about the concepts of binding and loosing. Can you recommend any resources on this? That's a great question. I don't think I have any right now. I was taught about it in person is where all of my teaching comes from. The only place, brace yourselves, everybody. The only place I can remember talking about it is not in depth and it's not academic, but it was Velvet Elvis by Rob Bell. That's the one place that I can remember reading something about it. It's probably been in other books, but I cannot think of any other resources. And I know Rob Bell, Run for the Hills. Polly on Facebook says, I'm thinking about going to Bible school to a deaconess program. Is there a Bible school that approaches scripture from the same angle as Bema? Brent's got a Bema FAQ video. He's going to drop in the comments for you, Polly, because that is a great question that we get a lot. So I made a video just for that. Christine, I just wanted to know if we should celebrate Christmas or anything pagan, or do you eventually get there in the podcast? I'm only on episode 12. We talk about it at different places, especially later, kind of after season 5. We start doing some Christmas episodes. A younger version of me used to get more wound up about that stuff. I do not get wound up about, we should be honest about pagan roots of different things and where they come from. I don't think there's as much pagan roots as I used to think there was behind every corner, but celebrating Advent is not some great evil, no matter what the roots of it are. It's what we do with it today. It's how we reclaim some of those roots and how we give those things. Again, it's about meaning making, right? So I celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. I celebrate Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur. I celebrate Sukkot, and I celebrate Lent. And I celebrate those Jewish festivals because I am Jewish. If you're not Jewish, I wouldn't recommend you celebrate the Jewish festivals, because those are Jewish expressions with a Jewish covenant. Learn from the Jewish festivals. Pull from them. Rapid fire. Caleb on YouTube says, I'm increasingly Catholic curious. I'm at a Catholic institution right now. Caleb, did you know that? I'm doing my grad work at Xavier University, because I have loved learning from the Ignatian tradition, the Jesuit tradition. I was raised Southern Baptist, so naturally that terrifies me, but I'm curious, what elements of their practice today were present for the early Church of Acts? In addition, that's a good question. It's in some ways all of it, because it's the only thing that existed. It was only Catholicism for 1,500 years. But in another way, I don't want to say none of it, because everything that we understand today is a development and an evolution of how we've grown with God for 2,000 years. Caleb says, in addition, I've recently come across their teaching on Mother Mary being the new Ark of the Covenant, and that blew my mind. Yeah, that's a cool teaching. And I know Protestants always get really wound up about, Catholics and Mary, and they venerate her and they pray to her and they think she's a co-mediatrix, and it's all kind of a misunderstanding and a misappropriation and a misappreciation for some of the beautiful theology that is there. I don't think Catholicism is perfect any more than any of our other faith traditions, but there's some real beauty there. There's some real historic anchoring there that I really have come to appreciate. And there's still a lot of things that I appreciate and still, at the end of the day, probably end up saying, yeah, no thanks. But I appreciate what I'm learning from it. I appreciate that perspective. And you can do that. Like, it's okay to like learn from something and be like, oh, that's kind of cool. No, I can appreciate that. I respect that. That's cool. And if that works for you, that's great. Probably doesn't work for me. Okay, cool. Be curious. I learned so much. That's why I'm going there for grad work. And that doesn't mean just because you're curious that you are becoming one. And if you did become one, I'm not sure that's like a fast ticket to hell. Like, I'm not sure that that's how it works. Let's see here. What else do we got? Maya says, how does the genealogy of Mary and Joseph lead back to David? Why are the two genealogies different? There's a lot of discussion about that, Maya, and a lot of different takes. And I'm not sure. One take is that one genealogy is Joseph's genealogy and the other genealogy is Mary's genealogy. It doesn't look that way directly in the text, but some people have been like, well, that would explain why this is different. That would explain why this is over here. I tend to somewhat lean that way, but oftentimes, instead of trying to answer that question, I'm going to shift to what are the genealogical themes? Like, why is Matthew starting with Abraham and making his case, which is very Davidic, like your question talks about David. Matthew's being very Davidic. Luke goes back to Adam because he's being very human, Adamic. He doesn't want it to be about Abraham and David. He wants it to be about mankind and a cosmic perspective. So instead of like trying to figure out things that I may not be able to find a resolution for, I try to shift my questions and go, okay, but are there buried treasures over here that, because I'm not sure about like the Joseph, Mary, I don't know, but there are some things I can be like, okay, well, that's definitely a part of what Matthew's doing, and that's a part of what Luke's doing. Are those helpful? That's often how I dance with that. Do you see the woman at the well story as redeeming the covenant renewal of Joshua 24? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if that's Charles. Charles, that's a good question. It's a good question. I've had some of those thoughts and just have not been forced to complete them. I've wondered at times if there's a connection there and just have never sat down and done the work to come to a resolution on that. But it's kind of like this seed of a thought that I've been like, and I wonder if that's connected to that. And then I love the question. I'm interested, and I think there's a good possibility. JCGS over Rain on YouTube says, in the parable prodigal, did Jesus trump the Pharisees when he added, and the father ran by adding the accuser villagers from Zechariah 4, implying he knew the scriptures? I don't know what that might be referencing. And the father ran by adding the accuser or villagers from Zechariah 4, implying he knew that. Well, he's definitely implying he knew the scriptures. Adding the father ran in Zechariah 4. I don't know. I'd have to dig deeper into what you might be referencing there. It's a great question. I don't know. Let's see here. I was listening to the episode of Matthew 9. Have you done any more thinking about how the section on the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, may not primarily be about converting people to Jesus as followers? Well, I think, David, yeah, yes. And when I listen to that episode, I sometimes am kind of like blown away at where my own, I don't mean this in an arrogant way. Sometimes I listen to myself and I'm like, man, I was cooking with gas that day. That's good. And that's one of those episodes where I was like, I like that. I have really doubled down on, I think it's a reference to Ruth. I don't think it's a reference. I don't think the harvesters are more people to convert converts. The harvesters are people in need, because that's Ruth. The field is ripe for the harvest. There's plenty to go around. Where are the people that have needs? Where are the Moabites? Where are the Mumsers? Where are the aliens and the orphans and the foreigners and the widows? Where are they? Because the harvest is plentiful. So why aren't they here? That's what I think is being said. David says on YouTube, what did you make of 1 Corinthians 7:8? To the unmarried and widows, I say it's good for them to remain single as I am. Yeah, I had to do I actually had to do a grad paper on this very passage, which I'm not going to be able to get all the way into. But I do think there's an element to what Paul's doing. There's an eschatological tinge to Paul's argument where Paul's saying the kingdom is coming. He's not trying to diss on marriage. He is trying to promote singleness. He's trying to say there is a place for singleness. Marriage is not the ultimate goal and not what everybody needs to be doing. And he's got an eschatological tinge to it that says, because the kingdom is coming and there's more important things that we can be giving our lives to. That's not a command in the imperative that says everybody should be pursuing singleness or celibacy. But he is looking to those people saying, there's plenty of stuff for you to give yourself to. You are not unwhole because you are unmarried or because you're widowed. Mike on Facebook says, do you have a place where you have talked about conditionalism versus eternal conscious torment? Not necessarily. We do have some BEMA FAQ videos that I always hate sharing because everybody just gets so mad about them. But I digress. You asked the question, Mike. Brent can link them. They're on Heaven, Hell. I did a series on soteriology, but there is a BEMA FAQ video on Heaven, Hell. There's probably a BEMA FAQ video about asking questions and sacraments and controversy that are probably adjacent, relevant. So I'll let him link whatever he wants. Oh, let's see here. Is Jesus redeeming? Man, we're having a lot of fun. Oh, it's only 10:04. Come on, rapid fire response. Let's go. Charles says, is Jesus redeeming to follow Tanakh stories and sequence by showing Jesus as the living word? Is Jesus redeeming to following Tanakh stories and sequence? The wedding, the temple cleansing. Okay, I get what you're doing here, Charles. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to link them to different stories. I'm looking at what you're doing here, though. That's a cool way to do it. I'm not saying I dislike what you've done there. You've connected Exodus 19 to John 1, Numbers 25 to John 2, Deuteronomy 30 to John 3a, Deuteronomy 34 to John 3b, Joshua 24 to John 4. I like that. That's cool. I like that. It's really cool. I do the same thing, but I connect it to the Jacob story. So the wedding is Jacob's wedding. The temple cleansing is Jacob's second wedding. The new heart, John 3. Where does that land? There's a reference to Jacob's ladder earlier in John. So it starts with like Jacob's ladder, Jacob's weddings. It's Jacob, all the way up to Joseph. That's what I think John is doing. But I like what you're proposing here. And as always, I love where your head's at. Let's see if I can do better here with JCGS over Reigns question on YouTube. I didn't do a good job with your last one, but let's see. Is God's wrath a way of him pulling or separating away? Great question. I'm going to say no. God's wrath is a way of him leaning in. God's wrath is not punishment and separation, even though the prophets will use language that can suggest those things. God's wrath is the same to a parent with my kids. When I discipline my kids, I'm not sending them away or pulling away from them. Excuse me. I'm leaning into relationship. I actually have to get closer in order to discipline them, shape them, be a part of the thing that God wants them to become. So I think God's wrath is actually him leaning in because he cares more rather than him deserting because he doesn't like the ick. It's him leaning in because he wants to clean up the ick. And he's actually calling us to the moment at hand. He's bringing us to crisis. That's a really rapid fire response. Here we go. Last one. Jill on Facebook says, dang, rapid fire, you were just getting to one of my long-standing questions about Gentiles celebrating the high holidays. There is a festival edition playlist that Brent can link on YouTube. It's been going for a long time. There are like 4 or 5 years worth of festival. And the first few videos are older. They're 4 or 5 years old. And I do talk a little bit about appropriation and festivals. It definitely did not make everyone happy. I had a large Hebrew roots crowd that was very upset about those first few videos. But you might find those helpful. Yeah, it's a tricky situation. I want to learn from the festivals. I think Christians should learn from the festivals. I think Christians should pause and hesitate before they say, Sukkot is our thing. Sukkot is the Jews' thing. Yeah, but we were grafted into but then we kicked the Jews out historically. We're not we rejected the grafting. So what do we do with that? If we were grafted into a Jewish thing, then the Jews would be celebrating their Jewish festival and we would be invited into it because we're the adopted kids. But that's not the position we took. The position we took was, thanks, it's ours now. You can get out of here, and now we're in charge. So we can't say we want one half while we reject the other half. We either need to have all of it, or we need to step back and go, what do we do if we're missing that? What's our relationship to these things? Consider what it would feel like if this was a Native American, an indigenous people's tribe. If we took some of their cultural practices and appropriated them as our own, it'd feel icky. It would feel like, this doesn't feel quite right. This feels a little wrong. And it's not quite the same. It's not quite apples to apples because our Christian heritage it shares a Jewish root, but it's also not completely separate either. It's not quite apples to apples, but it's not something totally different. And so we got to wrestle with, we got to grapple with, and we have to listen when our Jewish brothers and sisters are saying, hey, that feels deeply offensive. I think the gospel just demands us to be like, okay, I want to listen. I care about that. I want to live at peace as far as it depends on me. I want to live at peace with everyone. I want to hear that voice. I want to consider what that means. I want to consider power dynamics and somebody mentioned colonialism earlier I want to consider all those things so I know how to steward this relationship well. So it's 10:09, Brent. I got done before the 10:10.
I mean, on balance, I'd say that was pretty rapid fire. That was very impressive.
I know. That's some of my best work right there.
I got through all of the live questions that were submitted before you started doing that, and a couple more that came in after. But when you start answering live questions, they really start flooding in. So there's a few that got left on the cutting room floor, but we did pretty good. It
was actually encouraging. There was one night where we didn't have a huge crowd online with us live, and we had very little questions. And I remember that night we were struggling to come up with some content. So that was more encouraging this evening. Good work, everybody.
Well, and I have one other encouraging message to share from Tina to close us out on Facebook. She said, Baymont is truly an incredible resource. Thankful for our Bible study group leader, Brad, who introduced you to us. This is the part that I'm in love with. I now humbly lead a small group of ladies in a Bible 101 class. Some of them have never opened a Bible, and I have Baymont as a resource. Thank you. God bless. So, oh man, I love to hear about a discussion group that goes on and forms another group. That's it. That warms my heart so much.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, was this in the episode? I feel like we're rehashing all the things that we are going to say in the session 10 intro. But we aren't just here to study and like learn some facts. Like, we are here to live it out. So when you take something that has changed your life and you turn around and you disciple and lead other people.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers there, because there's not there's the content, which is awesome, but there's also something that happened between people that somehow got passed on, and somebody else said, it's not just the content. Somebody said, I can participate in that way too. So it was the way that it was facilitated, the way that it was engaged, the way that it was led, that somehow equipped and encouraged other people to say. So there's a lot going on there. That's beautiful.
Bravo to Brad. Bravo to Tina. A little applause.
Yeah.
I don't know what I think about this applause sound effect. I think I'm going to have to find a better one if we're going to keep this up. But
I don't know. I kind of like the yelling that comes in once I'm not totally freaked out by it. It's great.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, our next Q&A, supposedly with Brian David, I guess, is Wednesday, February 11th, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. If you go to the news page on the Baymont website, there's a fancy little link that you can click, and it'll show you what time it is in your local time zone anywhere in the world. So check that out.
I love that. And don't forget about martysolomon.com/books. We're looking for a book launch team. So,
oh, baby. Yeah, I got that updated.
If you've got some social media platforms and you want to be a part of reading the book early, getting a couple special gifts, come be a part of the launch group.
I'll link it again.
Love it.
And pre-order that book, baby. We got all the links on there, so you can pre-order from your book vendor of choice. Audiobook, you're going to record the audiobook again, so audiobook will be available at some point.
Yep, Friday morning. It's not available yet because I haven't read it, but Friday morning I head over to start recording. So,
well, yeah, it's probably available for pre-order though, right?
Pre-order, you betcha.
Yeah. That's what we're talking about, pre-order.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's the story. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Talk to you in a few weeks, everyone.